everybody, welcome back to Story Time. So we are reading The Creakers. The last thing that happened in chapter 3 was Lucy was helping all the kids because they'd all gone crazy without the grown-ups. So she was being the grown-up. And she took herself off to bed early. And then the last thing that happened in the chapter was there was someone else in Lucy's house. There was something else in Lucy's room. So we're going to see now what it was. Chapter 4. Lucy wasn't alone. Dum dum dum. Lucy's eyelids were feeling heavy. She was exhausted after her busy day helping the kids of Whiffington to adjust to life with no grown-ups about. Adjust means get used to. However, even though she felt more tired than she'd ever before, for some reason she couldn't sleep. She lay on her back and started to imagine she was sinking peacefully into the mattress, as if it was a fluffy cloud. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could see her mum perched on the edge of her bed, where she normally sat each night. She'd slip off the hairband, holding her hair back, letting her long brown curls fall down past her shoulders as she sipped on their nightly shared mug of cocoa before handing it to Lucy. "Close your eyes, my little Lucy Pops," Mrs. Dunstan would say, her brown eyes twinkling. "Feel yourself floating on the fluffiest cloud, light as a feather." "But Mum, I'm too awake to go to sleep. It's impossible," Lucy would answer. "Impossible isn't real, Lucy Pops. It's just in your mind." Lucy felt the corners of her mouth rise into a little smile at her mum's nickname for her, Lucy Pops. Her dad used to call her this too, before he left. Suddenly, the fluffy cloud she was floating on in her mind dissolved, and she was just lying on her cold mattress in her empty room in her empty house, alone. Impossible certainly felt really real. She quickly closed her eyes again in an attempt to get back onto that cosy cloud. She tried to imagine her body sinking into it. It was her favourite thing to imagine. But on the night of the day it all began, Lucy's mind just couldn't imagine things right. Her comfy cloud was not as comfy without her mum there. "Where are you, Mum?" Lucy thought as she rolled onto her side and looked at the full moon through the gap in the curtains as it watched over Whiffington town. Was her mum out there somewhere? Lucy tried to shake the worry out of her head. She rolled this way and that, then that way and this, but neither way was working, so she settled on her back, staring up at the ceiling. Her heart sank as the little glow-in-the-dark stars and planets looked back down at her. Her dad had once arranged them into a giant smiley face on the ceiling. This is her room. And if we zoom in, we can see that the stars here arranged in a smiley face above her bed. Lucy realised that there were reminders of her parents dotted all over her room. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the certificates presented by her dad on the day she broke the family jelly baby eating record, gulping down 27 in 30 seconds, even the green ones. She turned away from the wall, but this put her face to face with the bookcase, which was overflowing with all the stories her mum read with her. The absence of her mum made it very quiet in her house, unusually quiet, so quiet in fact that the silence was almost loud. Lucy tried humming a little song to herself, a lullaby, but it didn't help. It just reminded her of her dad. "Time for a song, Lucy Pops," she pictured him saying as he reached into his pocket for his most prized possession, his silver harmonica. "Any requests?" he always asked, but Lucy knew he was teasing because he always played the same song. It was one he'd written himself. It was called Lucy's Lullaby. He played it to her every night until he disappeared. Lucy sighed. She got out of bed and walked over to her wardrobe, but just as she was about to open the door, she heard a tiny noise. It sounded like the creak of the floorboards. Lucy suddenly felt a little chill, a shiver running down her back like someone was watching her, which you already know was true, but Lucy didn't know yet. "Hello?" she called. She looked over her shoulder, but there was no one there. "Don't be such a silly sausage, Lucy," she whispered firmly to herself. "You're just getting the chills because you're alone. Now pull yourself together." With that, she opened her wardrobe and lifted a wooden panel on the floor, which revealed a secret hiding place. This was where she kept special things she didn't want anyone else to find. There wasn't much in it. A pretty shell she found at the beach once, a smashed up conker that had to, to second place in the playground conquer championships and a framed photograph. She picked it up and stared at it. 3 people smiled up at her from a picture. A young Lucy with her arms wrapped around her mother's neck as she kissed Lucy on the head, and behind them both, cradling the 2 most precious things in his life in his arms, Lucy's dad. Lucy's heart ached every time she looked at this photo, at how happy the 3 of them were. She always made an extra effort to study her dad's face, as if she was afraid that somehow she might forget him. She held that photo close so she could see every detail.